Hi, I'm Charlie Canham. I'm a forest ecologist here at the Cary Institute of Ecosystem Studies, and I'm happy to be here with you this morning. So, who wants to start?
What made you want to become a scientist?
You know, I'm not sure I really knew what scientists did when I decided I wanted to be a scientist. I got interested in forests and trees when I was in high school, and I used to go hiking in the woods. And I was trying to pick a major to be something to do in college, and I didn't want to go into the Army, and so I got interested in trees. And then I realized if you're interested in trees, there weren't a lot of things you could do with that. Being a scientist was sort of the obvious thing.
What was your worst childhood experience?
I try to forget all of those. So I'm probably my father was a soldier, served in 3 wars, and lost a leg in Vietnam to friendly fire. A U.S. helicopter attacked the wrong town, and that was pretty traumatic for him and pretty traumatic for us. It took us a long time to find out what had happened. The Army didn't really want to admit what had happened, and actually the evening news carried footage of him being evacuated from the battlefield before we were even notified. So I was in 7th grade. So that's probably right up there at the top.
Is science the only thing you like to do?
No, I have a granddaughter who's 3, so that's probably my favorite thing to do is spend time with her. I'm also a furniture maker. Actually, after my dad got out of the Army, he and I and my brother all got interested in woodworking, and so I learned furniture making. Before I started graduate school, I worked as a carpenter, and I got to apprentice to this wonderful French-Canadian master carpenter for a year, and learned a lot of skills then. And so I'm going to retire in probably 5 years and just build furniture and garden and play with my grandchildren.
When did you decide that you wanted to become a forest scientist?
Yeah, that was probably in junior or senior year of high school. I think when you get to be that age, you start looking ahead at college, and you're thinking, what am I going to do? And it's terrifying as a parent. It's terrifying as a parent to watch your kids make these decisions, because as parents, you don't think they really know how to make that decision. And as I said, I just love walking in the woods and identifying trees and watching wildlife, and so but that really wasn't until I was 16, 17 years old and in high school looking ahead to college.
Did your parents encourage you to do science?
Well, my mother maintains my father was not disappointed that I didn't become an Army officer. I think he probably wasn't, but both of my grandfathers, all of my uncles, my father, my father-in-law, were all senior Army officers, colonels and generals. My grandfather was named after, and my father commanded most of the troops on Omaha Beach at D-Day. My father fought in 3 wars, and we lived at West Point, which is right down the river here, when I was in high school. And if I had graduated from West Point, it would have been 25 years after my dad, and he graduated 25 years after his dad. So there was I felt pressure to go into the Army, but after, this was during the Vietnam years, and which you guys don't have any idea about, luckily. So it was, I felt some pressure to go into the Army. My best friend's dad was director of admissions, and so I'd be over at Stu's house, and Colonel Rogers, his dad, would sort of say, "Hey, Charlie, when are you going to apply?" And I'd look the other way and think of an excuse. So, but no, he was, I think, my parents were, parents, as I said, they often have ideas about what they'd like their kids to do, but when push comes to shove, it's up to the kids.
any experiment made you feel uncomfortable?
Funny you should ask. So for the last 3 years, I've been trying to ask some very big questions about how these forests are going to respond to climate change. You all know the issues about climate change. And I have some very inconvenient and uncomfortable results because they're not really politically correct. So the model that we've developed and that I've spent 20 years building and using data from all over the U.S., forests sampled all over the country, the model suggests that these forests are really not going to change much in response to climate change. So this is going to be, this result is going to receive a lot of challenge. Partly because ecologists feel like we have to tell scary stories to try to get people to do something about climate change. And so a result that suggests that these forests of eastern U.S. are pretty resistant and resilient has forced me to spend much more time checking and rechecking and making sure that I'm right, because there will be lots of political implications to the results. So my life would have been much easier if these forests were going to show massive changes in response to climate change, but I don't believe that's going to happen.
Has any experiment gone wrong?
Oh, they always go wrong. Right across the road here, years and years ago, Rick Ostfeld and I, is Rick going to come and talk? We started these experiments to look at whether these grassy fields, the animal that lives here, the main one's called a meadow vole, a little guy about yay big, weighs about an ounce and a half, and they run around at night and feed on grass. But we were interested in whether they were helping keep the fields open by feeding on the tree seedlings. And so we fenced off fields. We were trapping the mice or the meadow voles and tagging them so we could keep track of them. And we were manipulating the densities. So we had some fields where the young males, if we had too many, we would take them away and Rick would let them go somewhere else. And so got this all set up, and then we planted seedlings in there, and then I flew off to Japan for 3 months to do research there, and I got this frantic call from Rick, right after I landed in Japan, that said, "Charlie, the seedlings are all gone." We had put them out thinking, well, we'll come back in 2 weeks and see if any of them have been eaten, and Rick happened to walk by the next day and they were all gone, and so we had to start over and make sure we went out every day. So experiments are always risky. And if they weren't risky, they wouldn't be much fun to do. If they couldn't fail, there'd be sort of no, if you knew the answer ahead of time, you wouldn't really need to do it. So it's tricky for graduate students. They plan an experiment and they devote a whole year, 2 years to getting it set up, and then something goes wrong and they have to start over. So you have to be in this for the long haul.
What is your favorite thing to study?
Well, I've said it a couple times now, and I do mean it. I'm fascinated by trees. I love to look at the architecture of a tree and the branching, and it tells a story about the history of how the tree grew and what's happened to it over time. And in fact, for my PhD, for my graduate work, I studied the architecture of trees and thinking about how the architecture affects their success in the forest. And so I just love, when I look out there, I see all the different species of trees, and I see the shapes, and you can tell different species of trees by their shape in many cases, but you can also tell a lot about what's happened to the individual trees and to this site as a whole. So I'm just fascinated by trees.
Okay, one more question.
Where did you go to college and what was your experience like?
I did my undergraduate. I went to college at Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana. I had never lived there. I had lived all over the world, basically as an Army brat. Growing up, my dad was moving around, but we had never lived in the Rocky Mountains. But my girlfriend, now my wife of 40 years, we were high school sweethearts, and her dad and my dad didn't get along. They were both Army officers and didn't like each other. Her mom didn't like me much either, actually, now that I think about it. But he was going to retire and move to Boise. He'd never been to Boise, Idaho. You guys know where Boise, Idaho is? It's way west. He had flown over it once and decided it looked interesting, so he retired from West Point and moved to Boise. And Judy was trying to pick college, and she decided just to go to Boise State University. And so I decided to go someplace near her, and Montana looked sort of close on the map. It turned out to be 500 miles away, but after our freshman year, she transferred up. And so I had a wonderful time in Montana. It was a beautiful place. I still remember the airplane flying out there and circling to land, looking out the window, thinking, what have I done? What is this place? It was so different from any place I'd ever lived. They paint a giant M on the mountain north of town. The football team every fall, the whole side of the mountain has this giant letter M. And I thought, who paints mountains with letters? But it was wonderful. I was this kid from New York, and my first roommate, Marty, went to a one-room schoolhouse, same teacher, K-12, 27 kids in the whole district. His father owned a 1 million-acre ranch. Marty didn't last long. Bozeman was the biggest town he'd ever been in, and he really partied and then moved to Los Angeles. But most of the rest of my dorm mates were miners' sons, and it was a great place.